She sat in her glass office high above the city, staring out at the skyline with a hollow feeling in her chest. From the outside, everything looked perfect. Sleek buildings, luxury cars passing by, lights glittering in the distance. But inside, her world was unraveling. For years, she had built her fortune from the ground up, taking risks that others were too afraid to consider. She had started small, investing in technology startups when no one else believed in them. She had made the right calls, the right deals, and now, people called her a genius. But all of that was slipping through her fingers faster than she could blink. It had started with a single failed investment. One company she had poured millions into had gone bankrupt overnight, a victim of fraud and poor management that she had never seen coming. That loss was manageable at first, a small dent in her massive empire. But then another deal fell apart, and another. Her lawyers and accountants were calling her constantly, sending files, spreadsheets, and legal warnings that she barely had time to read. She was drowning in numbers and deadlines, each one more urgent than the last. She rubbed her temples and tried to focus. Her mind was racing with what-ifs. What if the banks called in her loans? What if the investors pulled out? What if she lost everything she had worked so hard to build? The thought made her chest tighten, and her hands tremble slightly. She had always been confident, always believed she could handle any challenge. But this was different. This felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her, leaving her floating in midair with no support. Her phone rang again. It was her CFO, speaking in that calm but tense voice she had learned to recognize immediately. "We need to talk about the liquidity crisis," he said. "If we don't act today, the main investor could withdraw, and we could be forced into bankruptcy." She swallowed hard, feeling her throat tighten. Bankruptcy was a word she had never imagined for herself. She had built her empire with her own hands, with long nights and sacrifices that most people could not even imagine. To think it could all end in a few hours was unbearable. She paced across the office, trying to think clearly. Her mind kept flashing back to the early days of her career, when she worked from a tiny apartment with nothing but a laptop and determination. Back then, failure had felt temporary, a challenge to overcome. Now, failure felt final, crushing and unavoidable. The people who used to admire her were now distant and cautious. Friends who had once offered advice and support were nowhere to be found. She felt utterly alone. In an attempt to escape the stress, she picked up a coffee cup that had been sitting untouched for hours. The bitter liquid was cold, but she drank it anyway, letting the familiar taste give her a momentary comfort. Her assistant knocked lightly and entered with a stack of documents. "These are the final notices from the banks," the assistant said softly. "They said they need confirmation by the end of the day, or they'll start legal proceedings." She took the papers, her fingers shaking as she read through them. The numbers were terrifying. Millions owed, deadlines looming, penalties growing by the minute. She had no choice but to act, and she had no clear way to save herself. She leaned back in her chair, trying to gather her thoughts. She remembered the board meetings she had attended over the years, the strategic decisions she had made, and the confidence she had exuded in front of everyone. Now, the same confidence fell hollow. She felt like an actor who had forgotten their lines mid-performance, standing in the spotlight with the audience waiting for a mistake. She had always believed in her ability to adapt, to solve problems with creativity and intelligence, but the magnitude of this crisis was overwhelming. Hours passed, each one stretching endlessly as she reviewed contracts, made calls, and attempted to find solutions. Every conversation seemed to lead to more stress, more obstacles. Investors were hesitant, banks were firm, and partners were nowhere to be found. She began to wonder if she had miscalculated, if all the risks she had taken had finally caught up to her. The thought was unbearable, but she could not ignore it. She needed a plan, and she needed it fast. As the afternoon light faded, she found herself wandering through the empty office, unable to focus on anything concrete. She remembered the advice she had once received from a mentor. In every crisis, there is a hidden opportunity, but opportunities were invisible right now. All she could see were deadlines, debts, and the very real possibility of losing everything. She felt a weight on her shoulders, a pressure that made it hard to breathe. She paused by the window, staring out at the city below. People were walking. Cars were moving. Life was continuing as if nothing had changed. She envied them, envied their simplicity and lack of burden. She had built her life to be extraordinary, but extraordinary came with extraordinary risks. And now, she was paying the price. A soft knock at the door pulled her out of her thoughts. It was the building's janitor, a man she had seen countless times but never spoken to. He was carrying a mop and bucket, quietly going about his work. He looked at her and gave a small, polite smile. "Rough day," he asked simply. She blinked, surprised by the question, unsure how to respond. Normally, she would have ignored someone like him, caught up in her own problems, but something in his calm voice made her pause. She shook her head, forcing a smile that felt empty. "You could say that," she replied. He nodded, as if understanding more than she had said. Then, without another word, he continued with his work. She watched him for a moment, noticing the careful, deliberate way he moved, the quiet efficiency he brought to a job that no one really noticed. It was a small moment, but it sparked something in her mind, a reminder that not everyone who mattered carried a title or wore a suit. Some people had knowledge, skills, and insight that could only be seen when you stopped to pay attention. By the evening, exhaustion had overtaken her. Her office was dimly lit, paper scattered around her, the city lights twinkling outside like distant stars. She sat down heavily, her body and mind both weary. She realized she could not solve this crisis alone. She had to find help, guidance, or solution outside of herself. The thought was humbling, but necessary. Pride had always been her armor, but now it felt like a barrier, keeping her from seeing the people and ideas that could save her. She leaned back in her chair, thinking about the janitor, about the countless people she had overlooked in her life, and about the possibility that help could come from the most unexpected places. For the first time in hours, a small spark of hope flickered within her. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this darkness. But she knew the clock was ticking, and the next few hours would be critical. Every decision she made from now on could determine whether she rose again or fell completely. As night fell over the city, she stayed at her desk, staring at the documents, making calls, and trying to piece together a plan. The pressure was immense, but beneath it, a quiet determination began to grow. She had survived challenges before, and she could survive this one too. But this time, she would need more than her own intellect and courage. She would need help, insight, and perhaps a reminder that sometimes the most powerful people are those we least expect. The next morning, the billionaire walked into her office building, her mind still buzzing with worry. The city was waking up, the streets filled with people rushing to their jobs, cars honking, and a hum of daily life continuing despite her personal storm. She barely noticed any of it. Her focus was on the files in her hands, the legal notices, and the endless list of things that could go wrong. She moved through the lobby almost mechanically, nodding at the receptionist without really seeing her. As she reached the elevator, she noticed a man quietly pushing a cleaning cart down the hallway. He looked ordinary at first glance, wearing a uniform that made him blend into the background, but there was something in his calm, steady manner that caught her attention. He didn't seem rushed, didn't complain, didn't act distracted. He simply moved with purpose, handling each task carefully. For a moment, she paused, a strange thought passing through her mind. In all her years, she had focused on people with titles, degrees, and impressive resumes. Yet here was someone doing simple work with clear attention and care. She shook her head and stepped into the elevator, trying to focus on the crisis at hand. But the janitor seemed to be everywhere that morning, silently observing, sweeping, and quietly cleaning the space around her. There was a natural ease to the way he worked, a quiet dignity that seemed to radiate. She felt a tiny spark of curiosity, wondering what kind of person could carry themselves with such calm in a busy building while the rest of the world rushed by. Later that morning, she had to go to a meeting with a potential investor who might be her last hope. She carried her documents, running through every number and projection in her head. When she arrived, she realized she had forgotten a critical file. Panic rose in her chest as she searched through her bag. The janitor appeared in the hallway just then, quietly holding a folder that had fallen behind a cabinet in the lobby. He handed it to her without a word, his eyes calm and unassuming. She stared at him, surprised, then muttered a quick, "Thank you," unsure why the simple act affected her so much. Throughout the day, they kept crossing paths. In the cafeteria, she noticed him helping an elderly employee carry a tray. On the staircase, he held the door open for her when her hands were full of papers. Each time, she felt a growing sense of respect, even though she barely knew anything about him. There was no judgment, no rush, no pretense. He simply helped, and the small acts seemed to stand out more than anyone else's grand gestures. During a particularly tense moment in her office, she discovered another problem. A contract she had believed was valid was missing a clause, and this could be disastrous if it wasn't fixed immediately. She felt a surge of panic, wondering if she had overlooked it, if her team had missed it, if everything was doomed. She grabbed her phone to call her lawyers, but then she paused. She remembered the janitor, the way he had quietly noticed the missing folder earlier. For some reason, it made her think maybe someone else had an insight she had overlooked. Later, she found herself walking past the janitor in the hallway. On impulse, she spoke. "Do you happen to know much about contracts?" The word sounded strange even to her, but she didn't stop. He looked at her, his expression thoughtful, and shook his head. "Not professionally," he said, "but I've handled a lot of documents over the years. Sometimes small mistakes stick out if you look carefully." She raised an eyebrow, a mix of curiosity and skepticism on her face. There was something sincere in his tone, something that made her wonder if she should pay attention. Over the next few hours, she watched him work. He noticed small things that her team had overlooked. A missing signature, a number that didn't match, a misplaced note. She realized that while he may not have the title of an expert, his attention to detail was extraordinary. And then it hit her. In her desperation, she had been so focused on the big picture and the grand solutions that she had missed the small details that could save her. She wondered if she had been too proud, too used to thinking she had all the answers, to notice the value of someone doing simple work carefully. When the afternoon came, she was in a quiet part of the building, alone with her thoughts. She went over the problems she faced, thinking about the contracts, the investors, the legal notices, and her dwindling options. And then, almost without realizing it, she began talking aloud to the janitor, explaining her dilemmas. At first, it felt strange, like confessing secrets to a stranger. But as she spoke, he listened quietly, nodding at the right moments, and occasionally offering a suggestion that made sense in a way she hadn't considered. She didn't know why she trusted him, but there was a calm logic in his words. He asked simple questions, noticed overlooked details, and offered practical ideas. It was not the high-level business advice she was used to, but sometimes the simplest insight was the most valuable. She realized that perhaps she had underestimated the people around her, focusing only on their titles and resumes, while ignoring the skills, intelligence, and wisdom that could be found in unexpected places. The day ended with her sitting back in her office, exhausted but feeling a slight shift. She had begun to see a path, small as it was, to start addressing the chaos that had overtaken her life. She thought about the janitor, about how someone who seemed ordinary at first glance could offer perspective she had never expected. She realized that the world was full of hidden talents, and sometimes the people we overlook might hold the key to solving our biggest problems. As the sun set and the city lights flickered on, she looked out at the skyline again, feeling a strange mix of anxiety and hope. The empire she had built was still in jeopardy, but for the first time in days, she felt a tiny spark of possibility. Maybe she wasn't completely alone, and maybe the help she needed could come from the most unexpected person in the building. She glanced at the janitor one last time as he quietly swept the floor, his expression calm and focused. She didn't know what the next days would bring, but she felt a growing respect for him and a strange curiosity about what he might teach her. Something told her that the events of the coming days could change everything, and perhaps, just perhaps, he might be the person to help her find a way back from the edge of losing everything. A few days later, the billionaire was facing what she feared would be the final blow. One of her key investors had decided to withdraw, citing concerns over recent losses. The news hit her like a thunderclap. She paced her office, her mind spinning through every possible option, every scenario she could imagine. There seemed to be no way out. The creditors were calling constantly. Her team was exhausted, and the looming deadline made each hour feel heavier than the last. She sat down, her head in her hands, feeling the weight of everything she had worked for threatening to collapse. That afternoon, she was lost in her thoughts when she noticed a janitor quietly tidying a corner of the office. He moved with the same calm precision she had seen before, but this time, something about the way he looked at her caught her attention. It was not just curiosity or politeness. It was understanding. It was as if he could sense her struggle without her saying a word. She had been so focused on the chaos, on the numbers and deadlines, that she hadn't realized how much she needed a fresh perspective. On impulse, she called him over. He came quietly, a slight smile on his face. "Do you have a minute?" she asked, unsure why she felt the need to involve him. He nodded politely, setting down his mop and listening intently as she explained her situation. She spoke about the investors, the contracts, the looming bankruptcy, and her fear of losing everything. He listened quietly, not interrupting, giving her the space to speak fully. And then he asked simple, pointed questions she hadn't thought to ask herself. He asked about small details in her contracts, about clauses that might be overlooked, about discrepancies that could make a difference. At first, she felt skeptical. How could a janitor, someone without a business title or years of investment experience, possibly see a solution? But as he spoke, she began to notice the logic in his words. There was clarity, a way of breaking down the problem into manageable pieces that made sense. She realized that he was not offering high-level advice, but practical insight based on careful observation and attention to detail. They spent hours reviewing documents together, going over contracts, schedules, and investor notes. He pointed out errors that her team had missed, inconsistencies that could be addressed, and overlooked opportunities that could be leveraged. She began to feel a sense of hope she hadn't felt in days. It was subtle at first, a quiet optimism that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out. She started to see that his perspective, grounded in careful observation and experience with handling detailed work, might be the key to untangling the mess she was in. As they worked, she noticed something else. He didn't act superior or judgmental. He didn't speak in corporate jargon or try to impress. He simply observed, thought carefully, and offered suggestions with humility. There was a sincerity in his approach that made her feel respected and understood. She realized that she had been so focused on people with impressive resumes and titles that she had overlooked the value of someone who approached problems with honesty, patience, and insight. Throughout the evening, they pieced together a strategy. It was not flashy or overly complex. It relied on correcting mistakes, clarifying contracts, and presenting a clear, accurate picture to the investors. But it was effective. It was grounded in truth and careful analysis. And for the first time, she felt she could face the creditors and the banks with confidence. The fear and panic that had gripped her for days began to ease, replaced by a growing determination to act. During a quiet moment, she asked him about his past. He smiled faintly, as if the question carried memories he rarely shared. He explained that he had once worked in finance and business, before circumstances had led him to his current role. He had seen success and failure, had navigated the pressures she was now experiencing, and had learned the importance of patience, attention to detail, and integrity. She realized then that his calm, methodical approach was not accidental. It was a result of experience and wisdom that she had never expected to find in someone outside her professional circle. As night fell, they reviewed the plan once more. The billionaire felt a strange mix of humility and gratitude. She had always relied on her own knowledge and the advice of her team, but now she saw that sometimes the best guidance comes from unexpected places. She had been so focused on the grandeur of her empire that she had missed the subtle insights that could make the difference between success and failure. She realized that pride and preconceptions had almost cost her everything. Finally, she leaned back, exhausted but with a new sense of clarity. She looked at the janitor, who quietly resumed his cleaning, and felt a deep respect for him. He had seen what she had missed, had offered guidance without judgment or expectation, and had helped her see a path forward when all seemed lost. She realized that her crisis was not just about finances. It was a test of perspective, humility, and the ability to recognize value in unexpected places. In the quiet of the office, she made a decision. She would act on the insights he had offered, correct the mistakes, and reach out to the investors with honesty and clarity. It would not be easy, and the risks were still great, but she now had a plan. And more importantly, she had learned that sometimes help comes from the most unlikely sources, and that wisdom is not always found in titles or positions of power. As she watched him leave for the evening, she felt a sense of hope and determination she hadn't felt in days. The empire she had built was still at risk, but she now had a guide, someone who could help her navigate the complexities she faced. She realized that the coming days would be critical, but with careful planning, attention to detail, and the support of someone who saw the world differently, there was a chance to save everything she had worked for. The first steps toward recovery had begun, quietly, carefully, and with an unexpected ally by her side. The next morning, the billionaire arrived at her office, feeling a mix of anxiety and determination. She had stayed up most of the night going over the plan she and the janitor had put together. The path ahead was not easy, but it was the clearest way she had seen in days. She carried the documents carefully, knowing that every small detail mattered. Each sheet represented hours of work, observation, and careful thought. She had learned that overlooking the smallest piece could undo everything. The janitor was already in the lobby, quietly starting his morning routine. He noticed her as she entered, giving her a small nod. She nodded back, a sense of partnership forming between them, even though they were from very different worlds. She realized that trust had begun to grow. She needed someone who could see the problems clearly without getting caught up in panic, and he had proved he could do that. The day began with meetings and calls. The billionaire had arranged discussions with investors, lawyers, and partners, following the steps they had mapped out together. Each move was deliberate, each word carefully considered. She applied the corrections the janitor had pointed out, clarifying contracts, addressing discrepancies, and presenting a clear picture of the situation. The reactions were cautious, but noticeably better than before. She could feel the tension easing slightly with every conversation, where facts were presented accurately and confidently. Throughout the day, the janitor was her quiet support. He didn't interfere with the meetings or take credit, but he provided small reminders, gently pointing out details she might have missed in the chaos. When she needed to pause and think, he would quietly step back, allowing her space to process. There was a rhythm to their collaboration, her leadership and his careful observation complementing each other. She realized that the most effective teamwork did not always come from the loudest voices, but from those who worked thoughtfully behind the scenes. At one point, a problem arose that could have derailed the entire plan. A critical investor questioned the accuracy of a document, demanding immediate proof. The billionaire felt panic rising again, but the janitor calmly stepped in. He suggested checking a cross-reference that had been overlooked in earlier reviews. She followed his guidance, quickly finding the necessary information. The investor accepted it without further objection, and the crisis passed. She felt relief wash over her, a deep appreciation for the calm presence that had helped her navigate the storm. As the afternoon approached, the billionaire and the janitor worked together on preparing a presentation that would be shared with other investors the next day. She felt a strange mix of gratitude and respect for him. He had no title, no fancy degree, yet he had given her something far more valuable than technical advice. He had shown her how to approach problems calmly, observe carefully, and trust in the power of small, accurate actions. She realized that these were lessons she had needed for a long time. When the office quieted down in the evening, she asked him to sit with her for a moment. They reviewed the progress of the day, discussing what had worked and what still needed attention. He spoke in simple, clear terms, focusing on the important details and avoiding unnecessary complexity. She was impressed by how he could see through confusion to the core of the problem. She thought about how many times she had overlooked the value of someone simply paying close attention and thinking carefully. It was a humbling realization. The billionaire felt her perspective shifting. She had always believed that success came from grand gestures, brilliant strategy, and decisive action at the top. Now she understood that it also came from patience, attention to detail, and collaboration with people who might not fit the traditional mold of expertise. She had been so focused on her own abilities that she had almost missed the chance to save everything. The janitor had reminded her that humility and openness were just as important as skill and knowledge. They continued to work late into the night, The office lights cast a soft glow over the documents and spreadsheets, and the city outside seemed to hum quietly. Each correction, each insight brought her closer to feeling that the situation was manageable. She could see the path forward clearly, step by step. The fear that had dominated her days was replaced by a focused determination. She realized that the coming hours would be challenging, but she now had the right plan and the right partner to help her execute it. At one point, she looked at him and said, "I don't know how I would have handled this without your help." He shrugged modestly and said, "I just noticed what was there to see. You did the hard work. I only pointed it out." She smiled, feeling a deep appreciation not just for his skill, but for his humility. He had helped her without demanding recognition or reward, showing her a side of collaboration she had rarely experienced. By the end of the day, they had completed most of the preparations for the next crucial meetings. The billionaire felt a sense of calm determination she hadn't felt since the crisis began. She knew there were still challenges ahead, but she had learned to trust in careful observation, methodical planning, and the value of unexpected allies. She had discovered that wisdom could be found in the most unlikely places, and that sometimes the quietest voices could guide you through the loudest storms. As she left the office that night, she paused to look at him one last time. He was finishing his cleaning quietly, focused on his task, unaware of the impact he had made. She realized that in life, help and insight often come from those we least expect. And for the first time in days, she felt confident that she could face the coming challenges and protect the empire she had worked so hard to build. The journey was far from over, but she now had a trusted partner and a plan to navigate the uncertain road ahead. Together, they had begun the work of saving everything that mattered. The day of the final meetings arrived, and the billionaire felt a mixture of nerves and quiet determination. The past week had been intense, filled with long hours, careful planning, and unexpected lessons in humility and trust. She had gone from feeling like everything was slipping away to seeing a path forward, thanks to the guidance and perspective of someone she had never expected, the janitor. His insights and calm presence had helped her prepare for this crucial moment, and now it was time to face the investors and secure her empire. She entered the conference room with a folder of corrected contracts and documents. Her team looked tense, but she could sense their hope growing as well. They had seen her transformation over the past few days, from panicked and desperate to composed and ready to act. She knew that every detail mattered, that the smallest mistake could undo all the work she and the janitor had done. She took a deep breath, reminding herself of the plan, of the corrections, and of the guidance that had brought her to this point. As the investors arrived, she greeted them calmly, presenting herself with confidence that had been hard-won over the past week. She laid out the situation clearly, explaining the recent setbacks, the corrections made, and the steps taken to stabilize the company. She spoke honestly, acknowledging challenges, but also demonstrating control and clarity she had regained. She noticed the investors nodding, asking questions that she was now prepared to answer with precision. The janitor was not in the room, but she felt his presence in her mind. The calm, careful approach he had taught her, the importance of detail, and the value of seeing problems from multiple angles. Every insight he had offered was now being applied in her explanations and presentations. She realized that she had not just learned facts or strategies, but a method of thinking that could guide her in future crises as well. One investor brought up a potential issue that had been overlooked, a clause in a contract that could cause concern. She remained composed, remembering the way the janitor had pointed out small but crucial details. She quickly explained the situation, showing the corrected document and detailing the steps taken to ensure everything was accurate and secure. The investor's skepticism faded, replaced by trust in the thoroughness and transparency she was demonstrating. The room's tension began to lift, replaced by cautious optimism. Throughout the meeting, she fielded questions, clarified points, and reassured the investors with newfound calm. She realized that the lessons she had learned went beyond business. She had learned to listen, to value insight regardless of the source, and to approach problems methodically rather than letting panic dictate her actions. The janitor had reminded her that wisdom often comes quietly, and that careful attention could solve problems that seemed insurmountable. When the meeting ended, the investors agreed to continue supporting the company, impressed by her clarity, honesty, and detailed preparation. Relief and gratitude washed over her. She knew that the company's immediate future was secure, thanks not only to her efforts, but also to the guidance she had received from an unexpected ally. She felt a deep appreciation for Janitor, whose quiet presence and careful observation had helped her navigate the storm. After the investors left, she asked her assistant to locate him. When he arrived, she smiled warmly and said, "I couldn't have done this without you. Your insight, your calm, and your attention to details saved everything." He shrugged modestly, saying, "I just noticed what needed to be noticed. You did the hard work." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "No, this was a team effort, and your part was just as important as mine. You reminded me that help can come from the most unexpected places." She offered him a meaningful reward, one that respected his dignity, a promotion, a chance to take on new responsibilities, and an opportunity to pursue goals he had always dreamed of. But more than material reward, she wanted him to know that his value had been seen and appreciated. He accepted it with quiet gratitude, modestly acknowledging that he was simply doing his job well. The billionaire realized that recognition was not always about accolades or titles, but about being respected and valued for what one contributed. In the days that followed, the company stabilized. The legal issues were resolved. The investors were reassured, and the billionaire began to rebuild her confidence in leadership. She reflected on what had happened, understanding that the crisis had taught her lessons she would never forget. Pride and arrogance had almost led to disaster, but humility, openness to insight, and collaboration had allowed her to recover. She now approached her work with a new perspective, valuing input from all levels of experience and skill. She watched the janitor one afternoon, going about his work quietly and efficiently, and realized how much he had changed her understanding of success and leadership. He had reminded her that intelligence and wisdom are not limited to titles, that the quietest voices often carry the most profound insights, and that respect and collaboration are as important as skill and strategy. She felt gratitude not just for the outcome, but for the lessons he had taught her along the way. The billionaire returned to her office each day with renewed focus, applying the lessons learned to every decision she made. She communicated with her team differently, listening more carefully, valuing input from unexpected sources, and approaching challenges with patience and attention to detail. The experience had reshaped not just her company, but her perspective on life and success. She had learned that resilience comes from collaboration, humility, and seeing value where others might overlook it. As the sun set over the city, she stood by the window, looking at the skyline with a sense of accomplishment and peace. The empire she had built was safe, but more importantly, she felt transformed. She had learned to recognize and appreciate the unseen contributions of others, to approach problems with calm and clarity, and to trust that solutions often come from places we least expect. The janitor had changed not only the fate of her business, but also the way she viewed the world and the people around her. In the quiet of her office, she reflected on the journey from desperation to resolution. She had faced the brink of losing everything and had found her way back through collaboration, insight, and openness to unexpected help. She knew that future challenges would come, but she now had a deeper understanding of how to navigate them. The lessons of humility, patience, and recognition would guide her from this day forward. Her final thoughts that evening were filled with gratitude and hope. She had learned that no matter how high one climbs, it is often the quiet, unnoticed individuals who remind us of what truly matters: diligence, honesty, insight, and the willingness to help without expectation. She smiled, knowing that the billionaire she had been before the crisis was no longer the same person. She was stronger, wiser, and more human, and she owed much of that transformation to a single dad janitor who had quietly changed her fate.